I want to talk about Shalach Manos alternatives, but I want to start with the Ramah. We spoke about the Ramah in the past. And the Ramah's short but very, very influential life. He lived 42 years. According to some, he lived 33 years, but Pashtus says he lived 42 years. The Ramah accomplished a lot. He was a very consequential person. Now, something that had a big influence in his life was plague. Plague played a big role in his life, and I'll explain what I mean. Meaning in that Kufa, in the 1500s in Europe, every, 10, 20 years, a plague would sweep through the entire Europe, and it would collect tens, maybe hundreds of thousands of victims. They'd have a few years of quiet, and it would go back on to the next round. And this was all like the Shirayim of the Black Death, of the bubonic plague. It was like a 200-year cycle that kept cycling through. There was other plagues, different flus, etc. Now the Ramah lost a good chunk of his family in one of these episodes of plague. Between Hey Ir Shin Yud Aleph, which is 1551, until Yud Beis Sivan in 1552, in Prague, in Krakow, where the Ramah was the Rav, they lost 220 men out of the Frum Kehila. The Chaver Kadisha book says they lost 220 men, when in a normal year, during that same tkufa, that same amount of time, they would lose 28 people. So do the math. It's a crazy increase in the amount of people that died during that tkufa, and taking into account that the minig was not to record the deaths of babies unless they were like from a very wealthy family or unless there was something notable. The death of a baby wouldn't be recorded, and babies are certainly most susceptible to illness. So taking into account that babies and little children who died during that same tkufa wouldn't have been recorded, this is a crazy amount of death that's happening in a small community. A community that had, 20,000 Jews, to lose 258 of them in a year's time is a lot. Now the Ramah himself, during that tkufa, lost his wife, his young first wife, who was 20 years old, the daughter of Reb Shalom Shachna, the Ramah's Rebbe. He also lost his mother, and he also, at the end of the year, lost his grandmother from his father's side. So the Ramah lost personally during that tkufa. A lot of the women in his life died during that tkufa. Now, interestingly, the Ramah, during that time when he lost his first wife, the daughter of Shalom Shachna, so the Ramah gave a famous hesped that got him in trouble. Now, this is like a legendary story. Nobody really knows if it happened, if it didn't happen, but the Ramah supposedly gave a hesped where he said as follows. He quoted a pasuk that says, the pasuk says, Paktu na saharura azais, the Kivrua, Kibas Melachi. Now, if you're just listening to the cover story, it sounds negative. It's Paktunas Arura Azais. Like he's calling his wife an Arura and telling the ground to open up and accept her. Now, the drash that the Ramah gave was Paktunas Arura Azais. Arura refers to the land. Arura Adama, like cursed is the land. And Kibas and the Kivrua Kibas Melachi refers to his wife. But there were people who were shocked by this, by this aspect, and it was considered like something that was like controversial, like the Ramah did. And legend has it, and this is brought down in different places, that Reb Shalom Shachna, the Ramah's Rebbe, had a second daughter who would have been good marriage material for the Ramah upon the death of his first daughter. And when the shidduch was proposed, Reb Shalom Shachna said, "No, I'm gonna take a pass on this one." Now, there's those who say this story about the Bach and the Taz. This story it's one of these stories that is attached to a lot of different places, but it makes the most sense, and the most people say it about the Ramah and his Rebbe Shalom Shachna. The Ramah lost his wife during this Magefa. Her tombstone, I think, says on it what they would write. I'll read it for you just because we have it from the Chaver Kadisha book. It says, Nishmas Harabanis Moras Golda, Bas Merin of Shalom Shachna Shlita, meaning her father of Shalom Shachna was still alive. And then it says, Have al Shever Basami, Eicha Yuam Hazav Haskula, Harabanis, fine. And then it says, Lizachrina Hatoiv Husam Zois Matzevas Evan Altila, Ad Yakumu Sheikh Nefer Begila. This stone is put here as a Matzevas, as a Zikaron, until there'll be Tchias Amesim. Shna Shin Yud Beis, Yud Alef Yamim Liyarech Sivan, Hoysezeh HaBahala. There was this Bahala. So the Hoysezeh HaBahala is one of the ways that traditionally plague deaths were recorded on Matzevis. Hoysezeh HaBahala, like this just came upon us suddenly and it wasn't predictable. So Hoysezeh HaBahala, and then Tinish Masatzur B'tzur HaChaim, Mishar Tzadikei Olam, Began Eden, Amen Sela. This is the Ramah's wife's first wife. She was 20 years old. The Ramah himself was in his low 20s. Her kever. Now, interestingly, the Ramah in Chuvas, there's references to the Ramah's experience with plague. The Ramah is a young Rav in Krakow, in Tshuva Chaf, in Shut Ramah. Ramah received the shayla about someone who wanted to cancel a rental contract because the person who was renting it came down with the plague. And the landlord said, I can't have this in my home, I can't have plague in my home, and he wants to cancel it. And the Ramah goes through a whole Chesed Mishpat Tshuva about, the expectation of this, the non-expectation of this, canceling. In the end, he says something that's wild. He ends up saying, Seif Davar, Eini Raya Klal, Shiyuchel Maskez Elem Radait Dachel Eskarti. You cannot say that I was not prepared for this, because this is considered an oynisis. Kamasha Amar Shu Chayli Mistabik. This that you say that it's a contagion, it's something that passes very easily. Kulei Hevel. Now this is fascinating. Kulei Hevel Mishalibe Noikve Ermakain. This is just an excuse. Someone who's fearful says this. Ki Hashem Yisale Hu HaMoichitz VaRoifa. Kadosh Baruch Hu is the one who decides who gets sick, who doesn't get sick, who gets better. If this would be true, Batal Kol Dinei Bikur Chaylim. If you say that anything that's contagious, you have to stay far, far away from it, and you can't go anything close. It says in the whole Dinei Bikur Chaylim Rubatal. He says, Ki Lemetzinu B'Shom Makom Shechalku Bein Chaylim Mizdabik L'Sheinim Mizdabik. We didn't find anywhere that Chazal or Mechalik between doing Bikur Chaylim by someone who has an illness that's catchy and someone who doesn't have an illness that's catchy. Milinim Bal Rasan Chutz from one exception. It says, V'Kol Shegen the Nidin Didan, for sure by our illness that we're talking about over here, the Chaylim is Shchiach Machmas Ipa Sha'avir Hanog Be'irahi. This is a very common and prevalent illness because of the Shvacha ear in this area. There's no home that wasn't infected with this illness, he says. You have to say that a person assumed this. Now, seemingly the Ramah is maching avek with the whole idea of contagious illness, of contagious disease. Ramah is saying, contagious, HaKadosh Baruch Hu decides, everybody has it, disregard it. Now, and this is the tshuva that he's writing as a young Rav. He actually signs off Kayamina Hatzayer Moshe Isilish. He's a young man. The Ramah was a Rav in his low 20s. So I'm writing this as a young man. The Ramah was exceedingly humble. A lot of it due to his pasha, to his youth. The Ramah was writing to people much, much older than him. Right? So now he seems to be disregarding the idea of contagious illnesses and saying disregard it. Now, it's interesting that we know from other Seforim that there's clearly a din of contagion and a person's supposed to leave. Now, Ad Kedei Kach, that the Ramah himself ran away during a Shas Magefa, and that is the point of where I want to go today with the Ramah. That's why I'm talking about the Ramah. The Ramah himself ran away during a Shas Magefa, which we'll see in a second. So, l'chaira, what we have to say is that the Ramah in this tshuva is saying, the Ramah understood the difference. This was literally a discussion that people had by COVID. The Ramah understood the difference between a pandemic and something that was just an illness in a small location. The Ramah said, when someone has something catchy, don't mach b'shuga, fakir, stay away from it, run away, etc. But when something's a pandemic, a name bias asher in shames, it's all over, everyone has it, and it's everywhere. Then the Ramah said you can't cancel a contract based on that. You can't say, I'm a masker, I'm not going to get it. The Ramah said, aim bias asher in shames. This is a pandemic. He understood that this, plague that would roll through was something that was so uncontrollable by their standards and even by our standards today, that there was nothing, you can't say that a guy who rents an apartment and then a plague develops that you have to kick him out. Now the Ramah himself, and this is what I want to talk about, a few short years later, in 1555, the Ramah himself found himself in Shidliv, which was a small town on the outskirts of Krakow, with his father. His mother had died already. I don't know if he was married again. I don't think he was married again yet. The Ramah probably had, 2 or 3 young children. At that point, I think with his first wife, he had 2 or 3 children. With his second wife, he had 2 or 3 children more. So Ramah was a young father, a young single father with maybe 2 or 3 children in Shidliv together with his own father over Purim. That's what we've ended up there. Now the Ramah wrote that he's there in Shidliv, and he says, I'll read you. The Ramah says, the Ramah ran away in 1515 because of a plague that hit Krakow. And in order to avoid the plague, the Ramah ran to Shidliv. So the Ramah clearly did understand running away from a plague, unlike what this tshuva might imply. He writes as follows. He says, I find myself in Shidliv, avoiding this plague, and I don't have, where I want to just find the piece. He says, I don't have any shalach manos to give to my father, who's here with me too, the only other friend, Kilo, that I have in Shidliv, in hiding. I don't have shalach manos to give to my father. He says, Ubedakti bab Megillah ad makom sheyadi magasa. I sat down and I looked through the Megillah. Kifi here. I want to read you his ekdama. He says as follows. Hine, v'ani Moshe ben kvoid abamari aparnes v'amanig Yisrael. Hanikra Moshe Isilish. That's me, the Ramah. He says, Mikrakeo, hayisi b'teich hagoyla. I was part of the Galus. Hashem has galinu me'ireinu b'shnas shin yud vav. 1555, Lepoik. Machmas ipo sha'avir. Because of this disease that's spreading rapidly through our town. V'yinu garam ba'aretz leilanu be'ir Shidliv. we found ourselves in unfriendly home, place where we're not familiar, in Shidliv. Makam asher ein teina v'gefen. There's no teina v'gefen over here. Kamat mayim ein lishtis. It's almost there's no water for us to drink. Kim b'tachpula ha'ir asher b'miskenes teicha b'lechem. This is a city where you got to fight, claw, to find a piece of bread, he says. There's nothing to rest under. We were unable to be Mekayim the Yemei HaPurim with Mishta and Simcha. Lahasar Yagin Va'anacha. So therefore, to remove the Yagin Va'anacha that rests on us, Amarti Akuma Va'esmach b'mefali. I'll be mesameach with my work, he says. Af chachmasi amdali. Chach my chachma, my knowledge, stood with me, even though I'm over here. He says, Ki pekudei Hashem yisharm samchi leiv. The Torah makes me happy. V'lekachti tachas l'shayni dvash v'chalav v'nasati libi. He says, I decided to look through the Megillah. Lasser v'lidrish kavanas Megillah. To look through the whole thing, he says, Ki asipor nechmad lamara. It's a beautiful story. V'anister hu eitz adas. There's a lot hidden in there. Shu ramaz al klal yimei adam. And here he waxes off into what he's going to do, he says. And v'samti advarim b'sefer b'ksivasi liyas shamrli le'esik nusi. I put these words into a sefer so that they should be shomer for me when I get old. He says, don't think that I'm a haughty person. I think that I'm worthy of being mechaber svarim. I know I'm a humble person and I don't have anything to bring to the table, he says. I know I don't have anything to offer, but I'm here without the ability to give shalach manos to my father. And I thought that maybe this sefer that I'll write could be the shalach manos that I give my father. Maybe this could be the Mishloach Manos that I give my father. So the Rama, after his whole intro over here, saying where he's, without Svarim, he's in the middle of a plague, he's off in some village, he says, B'chach, I want to give something to my father, and this is something I could give him. And on the day of Purim, the Rama wrote this all on the day of Purim, he comprised a sefer that I think has, in some editions, it's between 30 and 40 pages. It's not a huge sefer, it's a kuntris on the Megillah, Al-Pi Derech Kabbalah, Al-Pi the Akedah, a Kabbalistic, Pardes-infused Pirush on the Megillah, and he gave it to his father, Shalach Manos. Now, this is the fact that he gave it to his father, Shalach Manos, is actually brought down in different Seforim. The Rama himself writes in Akdama that he's doing it because he has nothing to give. But, many years later, a great-great-grandson of the Rama, Ephraim Zalman Margolius, the Shar Ephraim, who was one of the Gedolim, in Galicia, he writes about this story that he knows of his great-grandfather, who was in Shidliv to avoid a plague, who gave this Shalach Manos to his great-great-great-grandfather, the Rama's father, to be able to give Shalach Manos. Now, another time where you find this is so 1 second. So really, let's ask the Shaila. So the Shaila is in Shulchan Aruch State in Hilchas Purim. It says Mefurish that you have to give Shalach Manos, and the Shulchan Aruch is very clear about what's included in Shalach Manos. The Shulchan Aruch says Shalach Manos is 2 manos of food that are prepared, ready to eat. You have to give those. As I state in Shulchan Aruch, in Siman, Taf, Reish, Tzadik, Vav, Sif, Dalet, I believe. Right? That's what the Shulchan Aruch says. You have to give Shalach Manos, and that's what Shalach Manos is. So, granted, maybe it's a nice little Purim shtick to say that I'm going to give you a sefer that I wrote on Purim as Shalach Manos, but could one actually be Yotze, the Chiyuv of Shalach Manos, by giving this sefer to his father? Now, the Rama actually in this Hakdama, as part of his humble intro to the sefer, he happens to write that I'm going to write a pirush on Megillas Esther, and if it's emes, then ignore my youth. Don't hold my youth against me. It's emes. Who cares, So I'm young. Kabbalas emes Misha Amri says, accept the truth from whoever says it. I'm young. Ignore my inexperience. And if it's not emes, he says, if it's not true, then chach, it's not worse off than the Purim shtick that the Yungalite like to say on Purim, and then say some Torah. So maybe that's a good hakdama to this inyan. Now, so where did the Rama get this from? So there's a Yisayistik Machlekes into the Tam of Shalach Manos. I think it's a famous Machlekes, everybody's familiar with this, but it's a Yisayistik Machlekes in the Tam of Shalach Manos. The Trumas Hadeshen, who's the first one to say what the Tam of Shalach Manos is, Trumas Hadeshen writes as follows. Trumas Hadeshen says, his shaila is as follows. B'nei Adam hasholchum l'chavereim b'purim chalukim v'sadinim u'kai gavna. People who send their friends clothing or something like that, as Shalach Manos, Yoytze midei Mishloach Manos oiloi. That's the Trumas Hadeshen's shaila. The Yoytze Shalach Manos or not Yoytze Shalach Manos. So says the Trumas Hadeshen. This is in Siman Kuf Yud Aleph in the Trumas Hadeshen. He says Yira the ein Yoytzim behem. They're not Yoytze with this. The nearer the tam de Mishloach Manos u'kedei sheyir l'cholach adai v'sipuk u'kedei l'kai masud kedina. So the Trumas Hadeshen is marich a little more than this. But Trumas Hadeshen, you say this as you say this stick Havana and what Shalach Manos is. Shalach Manos, he says, is about providing food so people could eat on Purim, and therefore giving them a cloak, as nice as it may be, giving them a new frock, is not Shalach Manos. It's not going to do anything for them in regards to having a Sudas Purim. So therefore, you're not Yotzei Mishalach Manos with that. That's what the Trumas Hadeshin says. Now, the Chasam Sofer is Masber, and the Chasam Sofer in Tshuva and Arachaim, it's Mekuf Tzadik Vav. Chasam Sofer is Masber. What about the way we do it today, where we're mostly sending it to people who we know clearly have a Suda prepared, meaning there's no, food insecurity is not so common, right? Meaning everyone has their Suda prepared and whatever, so how Yotzei Shalach Manos according to Trumas Hadeshin. So the Chasam Sofer says that included in the Trumas Hadeshin Svara is that there are people who are proud, who really do need food, but are not going to ask and are going to be too shameful to ask for the food. So therefore we give everybody Mishloach Manos and Purim Suda food, so that even the guy who slips through the crack and is not going to be found, he gets also becovered and you have nothing to worry about. So the Trumas Hadeshin, says this svara, that Shalach Manos is about giving food to eat. Now according to the Trumas Hadeshin, and this is how the Shulchan Aruch in lots of places seems to be paskening, there'd be no way to say that someone who writes a sefer or gives a sefer to his friend could be Yotzei Mishloach Manos with that, because you can't eat a sefer, it doesn't matter. As much as it brings Simchas HaTorah and it does something, you cannot eat the sefer and you're not Yotzei Shalach Manos with that. So where did the Ramah get the precedent, get this idea from that you could send Mishloach Manos of a sefer? So interestingly, the Reb Shlomo Kabitz, the Mechaber of L'Chadaydi, famous for being Mechaber L'Chadaydi, he, as a young Bacher as well, he was a Bacher still, when he was engaged in Saloniki in Greece, he was engaged over Purim, and he wrote a sefer that became very famous, a very popular sefer on Inyonei Purim called Manos Halevi. And Manos Halevi in the Hakdama, Reb Shlomo Kabitz writes as follows. He writes, the derech is that a chassan sends gifts to his kala or to the family, and I also want to send a gift to my kala's family over Purim. I'm engaged, savloinus, I don't have really what to send. So I figure, he writes, my shver and my brother-in-laws, kentach learning, you people who could learn, I'm going to write you a pirush on Megillas Esther, and with this I'll be Mekayim Mishloach Manos for Purim. And he writes a much longer sefer on Megillas Esther than the Ramah, called Manos Halevi. It's on the whole Megillah on Inyonei Purim, and it's a long sefer, a serious sefer, a sefer that's still very popular today. And he writes it and he sends it. He's sending it as Shalach Manos to his brother-in-law. And when the sefer was published later on after his death, I think the sefer was published only the first time after his death, his brother-in-law wrote, like a hakdama to the sefer, his brother-in-law wrote that Taka, the Purim that we got the Manos Halevi from our future brother-in-law, Reb Shlomo Kabitz, it was Freilich Eskabi, and it hit the spot. This was Mishalach Manos for us more than anything else that he could have sent us. And it was published like that after Reb Shlomo Kabitz's death in Tzfas. A place, 60, 70 years later, the sefer was published. Now, so the Ramah was maching nach, something that Reb Shlomo Kabitz did already, a few decades before him. Now, interestingly, is that Reb Shlomo Kabitz in Manos Halevi is machadish a different reason for Shalach Manos than the Trumas Hadeshin. And this is something that is brought down in the Paiskim. The Manos Halevi is machadish. He says the reason why we give Shalach Manos is not because what the Trumas Hadeshin says, to provide a Suda for everybody. He says the reason is because Haman told the Achashverosh that Hine yesh am echad mefayzer mefayred. That's very diffuse. It's very separate. Klal Yisrael is broken into little shards all over the fruited plain, and they don't have anything to do with each other. Don't worry, wherever you take them from, it's not going to hurt too much. They're all dispersed. They're all spread out. So to be mechaper, or to, so to speak, counterbalance what Haman said, that Klal Yisrael is mefayzer, in order to be marbe reis, to create and engender more friendship, Klal Yisrael gives Shalach Manos and Purim to make a friendly matziv. Everybody's friends with the neighbor on Purim. You go around, you give people that you barely spoke to Shalach Manos, and then it's marbe reis. It increases friendship. This is what the Manos Halevi says. And this is something that's brought down b'shmai lahalacha, that there's an alternate reason for Shalach Manos. Now, ad kedei kach that these two reasons, break down along these lines, is the Chasam Sofer in Tshuva Kuf Tzadik Vav. The Chasam Sofer breaks it down as follows. The Chasam Sofer says the Ramah brings down that if a person gives Shalach Manos to his friend, and I'll show you why this is relevant. The person gives Shalach Manos to his friend, and the friend says, I have enough cookie corner this year. I'll take it. It's good. Give it to someone else. I'm good. So the shayla is, are you Yotzei Shalach Manos or not? So the Ramah brings down that you're Yotzei because you gave him. He didn't want it. Okay, fine. That's his prerogative. He doesn't have to take it. You gave it to him. Mishnah Berurah brings down, I am Pri Chadash. That's Chaylik in this, and the Pri Chadash says that you're not Yotzei if you give Shalach Manos to a person who doesn't take it. So it says the Chasam Sofer in a Tshuva in Kuf Tzadik Vav that l'chayre the Pshat and the Machlekes, the Pri Chadash and the Ramah is the Manos Halevi and the Trumas Hadeshin. If you hold Shalach Manos is about engendering friendship, being marbe reis. So when you knock on someone's door and you say, here, I brought something to you, you engendered the friendship already. You were marbe reis. You showed him that you care about him. He doesn't want it? Okay, that's not important. You did your job. The job is done. But according to the Trumas Hadeshin, that it should have something to eat. Kol kama that he didn't take the food into his possession and into his home, he still doesn't have anything more to eat. So it says the Chasam Sofer, that's the Pshat in this Machlekes. And then the Chasam Sofer, and I don't know if he means this in a fully serious way or it's more of a kasha b'alma. The Chasam Sofer says that later on the Ramah says he makes a stira elsewhere that the Ramah says, I forgot which din he asks it from, where it's only if you hold like the tzad of the Trumas Hadeshin. Here, and he says as follows, the Ramah says, he's mechayev isha to give shalach manis, even though she's semech al shulchan acherim. A woman is an invitee to the Suda. She's not mechayev to procure the food for the Suda. It's the husband's job to do that. And still the Ramah paskins that a woman is mechayev to give a woman shalach manis. So you see, he holds the Marbareis Svara. He holds the Marbareis. I'm sorry. One second. He says, Mashim Choyivisha, Hatam Mishum Lamalis. No, he says Fakir. He says Fakir. I'm sorry. The Chasam Sofer says, Hatam is Mishum Lamalis Chesaron Sudas Shel Chaveiroi. You have to give, a woman has to give another woman Shalach Manos because you have to make sure she has what to eat. Even though, you have to make sure he says, Im Kain Eich Pasak, Im Macha Loi Pater, Halazeh Hatam Lemahani Mechila. He says the Ramah is kilu being oichas achaz mishnei rashim. The Ramah is going sometimes like the Manos Alevi, sometimes like the Trumas Hadeshin, and he leaves this as a kasha. So I'm not sure it's the world's strongest kasha. You could, others machavek this kasha. Yich Shilach from Sefer is already ma'orer that these two reasons play a role in the actual halach of shalach manos. So now there are those who wanted to say this is brought down like 100 years ago in all the different like newspapers, the Torah newspapers of the day. This nidin of giving svarim shalach manos was like a big nidin to dan, and everybody wrote shuvas in, back, forth. It was like a fun topic to discuss. So some people said, listen, silly. Of course, no one ever thought you give shalach manos from svarim. Of course, they also gave shalach manos, every one of these people, and if they didn't, it was because they were honest. They didn't have. The Ramah says he didn't have anything to eat, so he didn't give shalach manos. But of course, he wasn't yotze with this, and others wanted to be the fafel back and forth. So there were those who wanted to say, and this was a svar, people want to say based on this, some seifers, breaking down of the timing. They said as follows. If you hold like of Shlomo el-Kabetz, the Manos Alevi, Yilishi Tasei, that Shalach Manos is about being marber reis, it's about increasing friendship. It says if you have two people who love learning, and they're very excited about learning, and one of them composes a sefer in the honor or special for his friend, he's certainly marber reis. He's certainly making his friend feel, oh wow, you thought of me, you did something for me, you did something special that has my name on it. So he says, there were those who wanted to say, Shlomo el-Kabetz, Yilishi Tasei, who held that Shalach Manos is just about making your friend feel better. So he held you could give shalach manos from a sefer, and therefore he gave his in-laws, his future in-laws, his father-in-law, and his brother-in-laws a sefer to be mekayim shalach manos. Came along the Ramah, who was again a very Torani person, a person who appreciated learning, who's writing, Lulei Seiraschla, who's taking all his sipuk from the fact that he still has his chachma, and his father, who was clearly a tam chachma as well. And he says, I could give shalach manos with a sefer, but take someone who holds like the Trumas Hadeshin, that it's about just having a suda, so then you can't give a sefer anymore as shalach manos. So those who wanted to say there was the Ramah l'shitasei and Rav Shlomo el-Kabetz l'shitasei, meaning exclusively Rav Shlomo el-Kabetz, the Manos Alevi, and the Ramah who paskins that you could give shalach manos even if the guy doesn't accept it. So seemingly he's holding like the Manos Alevi svara that it's just harber reis to make friendship. So they would hold you could give shalach manos in this way. But others and the stamis of the halacha would hold that you can't be yotze shalach manos just by being harber reis. Shalach manos is about the suda. Now the Nittik Avrila grabbed in a tshuva in the back of Hilchos Purim. He collects, 20 places in different svarim, not whole svarim that written, but even like a svar that was said, like any tshuva that's written around Purim time. He says you'll find different rabbanim writing, and I'm giving you this, I'm sending you this shtikl Torah as Mishloach Manos. So he advances, and l'chayr he's correct that it's a figure of speech. When people say Mishloach Manos on a shtikl Torah or on a sefer, it's a figure of speech. It means to say a gift. Purim time you call a gift shalach manos. It means I'm sending you a gift. It has nothing to do with the actual technical halachas of Mishloach Manos. Now, just as another outcropping of this same shaila, now, and l'chayra he's right that it doesn't mean it in the technical sense. It means it more in the gifty sense, because if you look at some of these shuvas, some of them are dated 2 weeks before Purim, some of them are dated 2 weeks after Purim. They're not all directly on Purim, meaning the Ramah was very on Purim. He wrote it on Purim to deliver it to his father in quarantine, slide it under the door on Purim. Okay, that's very, very Purim-dik. The Manos Alevi sent it to arrive on Purim, but not all of these things that were written, Mishloach Manos, actually came or arrived or were directly connected to Purim. Now, a second, offshoot of the same shaila would be, there's a tshuva from the Divrei Yisrael and some other poskim about giving cigars or cigarettes as Mishloach Manos. The Divrei Yisrael writes, he says, Bizmanenu, you don't find a Suda Chashuva. Now, this changed already since then. He says, but Bizmanenu, we don't find, he's writing this 100 years ago, in the Tkufa when this was very discussed, the golden age of this shaila. He writes, you don't find a Suda that doesn't have cigarettes or tobacco to smoke, to eat, to chew, to inhale, something. You need to have cigarettes. But Frati says, everyone knows tobacco helps with making everything go smoothly, and tobacco is an appetite diminisher. You're not as hungry when you're smoking. So tobacco is like food. Of course, you can be Yetzer Shalach Manos by giving tobacco products for Mishloach Manos. Says, and even further, more will tell you. He says, we know on Yom Tif, the Pnei Yeshua, the Karban Nesanel, say you're allowed to smoke on Yom Tif because it helps, food go down easier and helps diminish your appetite, and therefore tobacco is a food product of sorts, and you Yetzer Mishloach Manos with tobacco. As I sagt some the Divrei Yisrael and the Shut Tirish V'Yitzer, these are obscure Tshuvas Farim, but Divrei Yisrael is not so obscure, but obscure Tshuvas Farim from that day who write this about tobacco. Now comes along others, and the Tzitz Eliezer summarizes this again in a tshuva and to summarize the halacha. Says the Tzitz Eliezer, he says, let me ask you a thought experiment. He says, imagine Yom Tif, you do not eat a Sudas Yom Tif, all you do is smoke cigarettes the whole Yom Tif. Are you Yotze, you're Chayve Suda? He says, it's Pasha, you're not Yotze, you're Chayve Suda. This that all the Poskim say, that it's an enhancer, it's a food enhancer, it's a food substitute. It does not mean to say that you're Yotze eating by smoking. So again, Purim, Shalach Manos, is a food-related din. It's not a din, it's not about what it makes you feel like, and I guess if we're going to update the Shaila, could you give someone a dose of Ozempic for Purim, for Shalach Manos? Take this in the beginning of the day, you're not going to be hungry the rest of the day, everybody's happy. Yetzer Shalach Manos, he didn't have to eat. Right? According to the Divrei Yisrael, you took away his desire to eat, you fed him, give a man Shalach Manos, feed him for a day, give him Ozempic, feed him for a month. So you took care of him, you're Yotze, you're L'chayrish, it's Shpit Shalach Manos, So comes along to the other and says, no, that's not food. Taking away his need to eat is not food. That doesn't substitute for giving food. So Lamaisa, I think, halacha Lamaisa, Seforim, cigarettes, clothing, we paskin like the Trumas Hadeshen, that we only Yotze Shalach Manos with food-related things. But certainly, Seforim, many times throughout the Deiros, were given as Shalach Manos, and cigarettes is a suggested a suggested replacement of Shalach Manos. But, that's the shmuz. All right.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.